On Everest, lies don't just fool the internet, they change decisions at lethal altitude. When proof matters more than survival, climbers keep moving long after they should turn back. Today, we're breaking down multiple Everest frauds caught on camera and how pretending to succeed pushed real people past the point of return. It was May 22nd, 2013, during the final weeks of the spring climbing season on Mount Everest. A narrow summit window had opened, compressing dozens of expeditions into the same ascent window. Forecasts showed wind speeds near, but not exceeding, standard cutoff limits. Gusts were expected to intensify along the summit ridge, where airflow accelerates over exposed terrain, but conditions were still classified as climbable. Among them was Daniel Krohn, a 34-year-old outdoor content creator from Germany. He had prior high-altitude experience, including guided ascents of Aconcagua and Denali, and was comfortable moving on fixed lines. Everest, however, carried added pressure. The climb doubled as a career milestone. A small outdoor apparel company had partially funded the expedition, with a clear expectation. Krohn needed photographs that could be read as summit images. Branding visibility mattered more than context. Guides had warned him that congestion near the summit ridge often made clean shots impossible, with ropes and other climbers filling the frame. Later message reviews showed Krohn treated this as a visual problem, not a logistical one. To compensate, he carried an oversized branded flag in his pack, far larger than the small flags typically displayed at the summit. When unfurled, it could block reference points and conceal surrounding traffic. The flag was never declared, approved, or disclosed to guides or rope teams. Just below the summit ridge, near a congested transition, above the balcony, Krohn stopped. Climbers behind him were already waiting, some adjusting oxygen regulators, others filming short clips. Wind moved steadily across the ridge, strong enough to tug at loose straps, but still within forecasted limits. Krohn turned slightly into the wind and unclipped one hand from the fixed rope. He reached into his pack. As the flag cleared the opening, the wind caught it immediately. Instead of hanging slack, the fabric snapped fully open and filled with air. It locked into the airflow like a sail. The force was transferred directly through Krohn's arms and into his harness. His boots slid sideways across hard-packed snow as his center of balance shifted abruptly. Two climbers clipped into the same fixed line were pulled with him. The fixed line system on Everest is designed to absorb downward load along the fall line, not sudden lateral force. As the flag remained fully pressurized, the sideways load traveled through the rope. Anchors began to strain. Snow around the placements fractured. Several climbers later reported hearing a sharp, cracking sound as the first anchor shifted. The rope recoiled violently. A second anchor tore free moments later. With no gradual release, the system failed under combined lateral and tensile load. 3 climbers were pulled off the route almost simultaneously. One fell backward down the Kangshung-facing side and disappeared into clouds within seconds. Another was dragged forward, struck exposed rock, and vanished over a break in the ridge. Krohn was yanked sideways by the still-filled flag, spun once, and then dropped as the fabric tore loose and fluttered downslope. Movement on the route stopped immediately. Guides above secured themselves to the remaining fixed lines and held position. No descent or recovery attempt was made. At that altitude, with steep terrain, unstable footing, and hundreds of meters of exposure, any intervention would have placed additional climbers at risk. The route was later stabilized, and a formal review followed. Inspections confirmed the rope, anchors, and hardware met Everest standards, and wind conditions were within forecast limits, with no storm recorded. Investigators traced the failure to unauthorized equipment and intentional misrepresentation. The final report concluded that an oversized, undeclared flag was used to falsely suggest summit proximity, and that deploying it created a sideways wind load the fixed line system was never designed to handle. The flag was later recovered, downslope, shredded, and frozen. 3 fatalities were attributed to fixed line failure caused by fraudulent equipment, with no fault found in the route, anchors, or the mountain itself. It was May 23, 2016, during the spring summit window on Mount Everest, when a brief shift in the jet stream lowered wind speeds enough for climbers to move above the South Col. Fixed ropes were already in place, oxygen bottles had been staged, and teams were spaced out to avoid congestion. Above 26,000 feet, climbing depends on systems working exactly as planned, with little margin for error. One of the climbers was Daniel Mercer, a 29-year-old content creator from British Columbia. He had endurance and alpine experience, was attempting his first 8,000-meter peak. He climbed independently, without a guide or Sherpa, aiming to document what he promoted online as a solo Everest summit. In the days before the summit window, Mercer posted tightly framed clips that appeared to place him near the Hillary Step. Later review showed the footage was filmed lower, near the south summit, where angles can exaggerate steepness and hide exposure. The videos were uploaded with delays to appear live. As viewers questioned inconsistencies in timing and terrain, Mercer announced he would live stream his descent to prove the claim. At that altitude, removing supplemental oxygen causes rapid hypoxic impairment, speech degradation, delayed reactions, and loss of coordination often appear before the climber recognizes the risk. Removing it will lead to hypoxia almost immediately. The first effects are subtle: slower reactions, reduced coordination, and changes in speech. Judgment often fades last, which is why climbers may feel capable even as their abilities decline. During his descent from the south summit, Mercer began a helmet-mounted live stream. Archived footage showed him stopping on the fixed line, turning toward the camera and pulling his oxygen mask away to speak. Wind was steady but manageable. Within seconds, his speech slowed, words became uneven, and he paused mid-sentence. 3 climbers later said he stopped longer than expected in that section. One described his movements as deliberate but delayed, with his hands hovering before each action. Another reported that Mercer waved them through after briefly blocking the line. About 2 minutes into the live stream, Mercer's hands began to tremble. He tried to manage the rope and camera at the same time while adjusting his stance. Frame-by-frame review later showed him bringing a second carabiner toward the fixed line with the gate oriented incorrectly, causing a cross-load instead of a proper spine load. As he shifted his feet, his crampons scraped across hard, wind-packed snow without setting. The load transferred suddenly. One carabiner released under tension. The remaining connection pulled him sideways, and the camera jolted. The rope snapped tight and vibrated as the live stream captured a burst of wind and a brief metallic sound before the image dissolved into white and gray. Investigators later estimated he fell roughly 600 feet down the Kongshung-facing slope based on GPS data, terrain features, and witness accounts. Climbers reported seeing debris drop from the cloud layer moments later, followed by the fixed rope going slack. The live stream continued briefly, broadcasting only wind before the connection failed. No rescue was possible. His last position was far below the route on steep, exposed terrain, and any recovery attempt would have placed additional climbers at risk. The incident was recorded by several expeditions within minutes and reported through standard channels to Nepalese authorities. Daniel Mercer was listed as deceased at altitude, and no recovery attempt was approved due to the location of the fall and continued exposure risks. His body was not recovered. In the weeks that followed, a formal review was conducted using the evidence that was available. Investigators examined archived live stream footage, GPS data transmitted before the fall, weather records, and statements from climbers positioned above and below Mercer on the route. Witness statements aligned with the footage, confirming that Mercer stopped on the fixed line, removed his oxygen mask, and remained stationary longer than normal for that section. The live stream footage itself became the primary source of evidence. The report found that voluntary oxygen removal likely caused hypoxic impairment, slowing reactions and reducing coordination during a moment when Mercer was handling multiple tasks, preventing him from recognizing the incorrect clip before applying weight. The death was recorded as a fatal fall, with hypoxia listed as a contributing factor. There were no rule violations, no equipment defects, and no sudden environmental trigger. It was May 22nd, 2017, during one of the busiest spring summit periods on Mount Everest. A short window of lower wind above the South Col drew multiple expeditions onto the route at the same time, packing climbers closely together as they pushed upward. Among the climbers that night were Daniel Kovacs, a 14-year-old from Hungary, and his father, Laszlo Kovacs, a 41-year-old construction supervisor from Budapest. The expedition was framed less as a technical challenge than a personal goal, reaching Everest together before Daniel finished school. Daniel trusted his father's judgment and deferred decisions to him throughout the climb. Daniel trained for over a year and completed all acclimatization rotations on schedule. He showed no signs of altitude sickness and, despite his smaller size, moved steadily at Camp 4. Above 27,000 feet, he remained alert, followed instructions, and maintained his oxygen flow as planned. They were climbing with a budget outfitter during one of the most crowded weeks of the season. The company advertised prices far below competitors, promising the same route, camps and summit chance. Costs were reduced in ways clients could not see on the mountain. One of those cuts involved oxygen. Investigators later confirmed that some cylinders were refilled off the mountain with industrial compressed air instead of medical-grade oxygen. Externally, the tanks appeared normal, correct pressure, standard regulators, full gauges. Once staged along the route, they were indistinguishable from real oxygen bottles. At that altitude, there was no way to verify their contents. During the final traverse below the summit ridge, Daniel's pace slowed. He didn't collapse. He didn't fall. His posture lowered slightly, and his steps became shorter. Guides interpreted this as normal fatigue at extreme altitude, especially in a young climber. A short rest was signaled to prevent further slowdown. Laszlo responded by switching Daniel's cylinder with a fresh bottle from the cache. He checked the pressure gauge before reconnecting the regulator. The needle sat firmly at full. Everything appeared to be working. However, Daniel did not improve. What flowed through the mask contained too little oxygen to support life at that altitude. Industrial compressed air has roughly the same oxygen percentage as normal air at sea level. At nearly 28,000 feet, that concentration is not enough. The system delivered pressure, but not breathable oxygen. Within minutes, Daniel's breathing became erratic, and his body seized while he remained clipped to the fixed rope. Guides increased the flow rate and swapped the cylinder again. The replacement came from the same cache. The seizure ended, but Daniel did not regain consciousness. He remained upright, supported by the rope and harness. His head dropped forward. His chest stopped moving. Climbers backed up along the line. Some waited. Others stepped past as guides made repeated adjustments that had no effect. By the time movement resumed, Daniel was already dead. The official finding listed the cause of death as hypoxic respiratory failure due to insufficient oxygen concentration caused by systematic fraud in the outfitter's oxygen supply. His body remained where it was through the rest of the summit window. No recovery was attempted. Above 27,000 feet on Mount Everest, exposure, exhaustion, and heavy traffic make retrieval too dangerous, and guides focus on getting surviving climbers down safely. Laszlo was escorted back toward Camp 4 within hours and was physically able to descend. After the expedition, investigators traced the oxygen supply to an off-mountain refill operation. Tests showed several cylinders contained compressed air instead of medical-grade oxygen. The tanks were pressurized correctly, which is why the gauges appeared normal. Records showed the practice was used throughout the season to cut costs. Clients and guides were never informed. The outfitter's permits were revoked, and criminal charges followed. It was June 6, 2017, during a short break in the weather on Mount Everest, when climbers began moving again through the upper Khumbu icefall. Visibility improved enough for teams to space themselves out along the fixed route. The ropes were already in place, drilled into blue ice and frozen blocks that had held steady for years. And along that route were frozen bodies. They were never spoken about directly, but everyone on the mountain knew where they were. Preserved by cold rather than decay, the bodies remained visible for years, gradually becoming fixed reference points along the route. In a landscape that constantly shifts, they stayed in roughly the same place, used quietly by guides to mark position and progress. Moving through the area that morning was Lucas Brenner, a 31-year-old freelance videographer from Munich. He had high-altitude experience and full permits for Everest, but no guided slot that ensured a clear summit image. On summit day, he climbed independently, deliberately spacing himself from groups so his footage would appear solitary. Lucas wasn't just filming the climb. He wanted images that looked higher than where he actually was. On Everest, location is often judged by what's missing. No ropes, no crowds, familiar reference points pushed out of frame. A single photo, framed carefully, can suggest a summit or near-summit moment, even when it isn't. Bodies along the route had become part of the visual landscape. Unmoved for years, they were treated like fixed terrain. One lay just off the main line, partly encased in ice and assumed to be stable. Lucas stopped there and framed a shot that placed him alone against the slope, the body blurred in the background. By excluding the rope and nearby climbers, the image suggested isolation rather than congestion. To clean the frame further, he pulled lightly at the body's shoulder to move the rope out of view. It shifted more easily than expected, then settled. He took the photo and continued upward. Hours later, on descent, he returned for another image. The light was better. This time the body was no longer stable. The earlier adjustment had broken the thin bond holding it in place. When he touched it again, the body shifted and began to slide. Unseen beneath the surface, it had never been anchored to rock, only held by ice pressure and friction. Once disturbed, there was nothing left to stop its movement. As Lucas clipped in and leaned back to adjust his position, the fixed rope took load. The rope slid against the body, which now acted as a loose mass instead of a fixed object. The ice beneath them fractured with a low tearing sound. They began to slide. At first, there was no drop, just sudden movement. Lucas's crampons scraped, failed to bite, then skipped completely. The rope pulled tight, then tore free from its shallow anchor as both bodies crossed the edge of the slope. Lucas was pulled first, dragged sideways into the broken terrain between ice blocks. He struck hard ice and disappeared into a crevasse. The body followed, tumbling without resistance. The rope fed through until it jammed and locked below the surface. No climber was positioned close enough to intervene, and the terrain made any immediate response unsafe. In the Khumbu icefall, once someone is pulled into a crevasse, access is limited by overhanging ice, unstable blocks, and constant internal movement. Even rapid response in that zone carries a high risk of secondary collapse. After Lucas Brenner failed to arrive at the next staging point, guides initiated standard missing climber procedures. Radio checks were made up and down the route. Nearby teams were asked if they had seen him pass. Fixed line segments were visually inspected from safe positions, but no one could approach the crevasse without putting additional lives at risk. Within hours, drifting snow and refreezing meltwater began to narrow the opening where the fall occurred. By the following day, normal glacier movement had already altered the area. A short section of fixed rope remained visible before disappearing into the ice, indicating where the fall had occurred, but the crevasse itself could not be safely accessed. Over the next several days, teams passing through the icefall reported seeing the rope frozen into the glacier at a steep downward angle. In clear light, two shapes could be seen beneath the surface, pressed together by refrozen ice. Any attempt to descend would have required cutting into unstable ice blocks directly beneath hanging seracs, a risk deemed unacceptable. No recovery was attempted. The incident was reviewed by expedition operators and Nepalese authorities once the route was closed. The investigation concluded that the failure resulted from direct human interaction with an object mistakenly treated as fixed terrain, destabilizing both the body and the anchor system. Afterward, guides quietly adjusted route descriptions and briefings. The location was no longer referenced by a body or landmark, but by a rope disappearing into the glacier, a practical marker in an environment where nothing remains stable for long. It was May 24th, 2017, during a short summit window on Mount Everest. Conditions above the South Col were considered workable by seasonal standards. Winds remained below forecast limits, visibility was clear, and temperatures were within the expected range for that elevation. Because the window was narrow, multiple teams moved at the same time, compressing traffic above 27,000 feet. One of the teams was led by Viktor Havel, 41, a Czech guide operating independently of major commercial outfitters. He marketed his climbs aggressively, advertising guaranteed summits and a near-perfect success rate. Contracts recovered later tied refunds to summit proof, photos, timestamps, and GPS data, rather than safety-based turnaround decisions. Among his clients was Daniel Ruiz, 34, a logistics manager from Spain. He had climbed Kilimanjaro and Aconcagua, but had no experience above 7,000 meters. This was his first Everest attempt. Multiple client statements later revealed an undisclosed practice. Above Camp 4, Havel clipped clients directly to his own harness with a short tether, removing their ability to stop or turn back independently. Former clients said the tether was introduced only in the upper death zone when retreat options were already limited. Just below 28,000 feet, witnesses observed Ruiz begin to fail physically. His pace slowed, then broke completely. He did not fall, but his knees buckled and his upper body folded forward. Oxygen was still flowing, but at a low rate consistent with minimal conservation settings rather than active climbing. Havel stopped briefly. Climbers nearby later reported seeing him adjust his stance and check the tether connection. A descent at that point would have voided the summit guarantee outlined in the client contract. Radio traffic reviewed after the incident indicates that Havel continued upward while maintaining tension on the tether. Each step required him to lean forward and pull Ruiz's weight behind him. Other climbers reported hearing Havel urging movement and counting steps. Ruiz did not respond. His breathing, monitored intermittently by sound and movement, became irregular and then shallow. At that altitude, loss of consciousness often occurs without visible struggle. Ruiz's body gradually went slack. Climbers below reported seeing the tether lose tensions abruptly. Havel stopped and turned. Witnesses positioned above later stated they saw Havel reach down toward the tether connection. Investigators concluded that the tether was unclipped after Ruiz lost consciousness. Witness timing and rope behavior indicated the release occurred at that moment, and Ruiz's body fell. Below them on the same fixed line was Aaron Whitfield, 38, from the United States, ascending independently. Multiple climbers reported seeing Ruiz's body strike Whitfield's shoulder and helmet during the fall. The impact knocked Whitfield off balance. The fixed rope, already under load from climbers above, was forced to absorb two sudden loads out of sequence. Whitfield lost his footing. The rapid change in tension caused the rope to recoil. Several witnesses reported seeing Havel pulled forward almost immediately afterward. Both men were carried downslope and out of sight within seconds. No one reported seeing either regain control. Movement on the route stopped right away. Guides above clipped themselves in and stayed where they were, while the fixed line was checked and secured. No one tried to go down. At that height, with thin air, cold and other climbers still moving through the area, a recovery attempt was not considered safe or possible. Later that day, once the rope had been stabilized, climbers were allowed to move through the section again. The investigation that followed relied on witness statements, radio logs, oxygen flow records, and client contracts taken from base camp. Reviewers found that tethers had been used repeatedly to pull severely hypoxic clients upward. Oxygen logs showed flow rates that didn't match normal self-climbing, supporting accounts that clients were being physically hauled in the upper death zone. The final report listed Daniel Ruiz's cause of death as cardiac arrest, caused by lack of oxygen, with additional injuries from the fall. Aaron Whitfield and Victor Havel were both declared dead from fall-related injuries. Havel's guiding credentials were revoked after his death, and criminal charges were filed against the company that operated the expedition. Thank you for watching. Like this video, click here.